Hello, hockey friends. Welcome back to the Gold and Steel Show, where we discuss all things Vegas Golden Knights. This week, we discuss the Golden Knights changing fortunes. They have earned points in 6 of their last 7 games. What has changed? Adin Hill returns to the lineup. Brisson makes his debut. We'll cover some listener questions. And the Oilers are unstoppable right now. Are the VGK in danger of slipping out of the race? So lots of great stuff to discuss today. We're going to get right to it. I'm JP, your usual host. I'm here with my partner in crime, Ian. How you doing, buddy? It's good to be back talking about hockey. And the Knights have kind of turned things around, haven't they? It's wacky.
Yeah, it's all good. I know the last cast we were talking about, whether some of these trends were downturns and how were they going to turn it around. And even, and we're going to talk about this later, I know, but all the adversity that these guys have faced, as in injuries, and we'll talk about that obviously in detail. But it's been a good couple of days. I know Cassidy wasn't too chuffed with the New Jersey game. He was saying before, he was quite clearly annoyed.
Yeah, probably the most annoyed I've seen him in his tenure as the Golden Knights coach. Reasonably so. The Knights were not very disciplined that game. I mean, let's just quickly look at what they've done. So they've gotten points in 6 out of the last 7. Mm-hmm. Almost all of those where they earned points were wins. Of course, there was the overtime loss to New Jersey. But let's see, if we go back, I'm just looking at the calendar. If we go back 7 games, so they beat Boston 2-1 at home.
Big game.
Big game. And that's kind of when things started to turn around for them. They lost to Calgary 3-1 at home. They beat Nashville 4-1 at home. They beat the Rangers 5-1 at home. They beat Pittsburgh 3-2 at home, and then went on the road. Of course, there was the overtime loss to the New Jersey Devils 6-5 in OT. And then a good bounce back win against the Islanders 3-2. Now it's interesting within the fan base and looking at the team, you still see a lot of worry and you feel a lot of anguish and woe kind of from the fan base. But when you look at it that way, it's like actually they're doing pretty well, which is totally shocking considering still it feels like half the roster is injured and they're it's a bunch of minor league guys that are bolstering this lineup right now. So I mean, when stuff like that, and yet before when they had more of their guys healthy, they were going to skid. I mean, what happens? What has changed? What's caused the turnaround? I mean, I know it helps when minor league guys are in. It's their chance to make their impression, right? They all want to be in the big show. And so they're going to give 110% every night. But you can't say that lineup is as skilled or as talented as the Golden Knights' full starting roster when they're healthy. What's different? Are you seeing anything different statistically? What's going on here?
No, I just think, I don't think the skid didn't show any statistical kind of big standout points saying, this is the issue they've got to face, right? So I think some of this is just peaks and troughs in a year. I'm impressed given, like the list of injuries, we were going through it earlier, and I have my little list here.
Yeah, let's talk about the injuries really quick. Like who's out right now? It's Theodore,
so Eichel
right?
Obviously is the main one. We've got Eichel out, you've got Theodore out, you've got Carlson out, and then you've got some of those others are out as well. But the LTIRs, the long-term injury reserve, and we were talking about this before we click go on air. And the difference between the two, just for anybody that might watch this cast that's new to the NHL or new to this kind of part of the NHL, is it's when you can reactivate them. That's the difference. So if they're on long-term injury reserve, it's a better cap benefit of doing that. But the downside is that you can't just shove someone on LTIR for a week and then bring him back and then shove them back on LTIR for a week and bring them back. If you're on LTIR, I believe, and I haven't researched this, so you correct me if I'm wrong, listeners or viewers, but I think it's something between kind of 10 to 12 weeks. You have to be on an LTI, maybe 13. That's the number I have in my head for some apparent reason. But there's the clues in the name. But when you're on long-term injury reserve, you don't have the ability to reactivate quite as quick. So for me, the fact that Eichel is on just the injury reserve list is definitely a sign that maybe the injury's not as bad as what we fear. I know we don't get a lot of information out from the Golden Knights management. That's just a common thing in the NHL where a lot of teams give very little, upper body injury not helpful. Day to day, not helpful.
All the vagueness.
Basically just as vague as possible. He's not feeling 100% right now, and you're like, great, thanks.
Right.
But I think the biggest kind of positive, if we're going to take one, is the fact that he's not on LTIR as of today. This is the 26th of January for me. I know it is for you as well. Actually, technically, we're past midnight, so it's the 26th of January for you as well. And he's not an LTR as of today. He could go on to it, of course he could, but as of today, he's not. But that's some big people down the middle as well. We were talking statistically last time about the one thing that Vegas have as a weakness, I guess, is face-offs. And then they lost Carlson, they've lost Eichel.
Yeah,
obviously two big centers, and then and they've still played quite well. So I think it's good to see the kind of other guys stepping up. I looked at, like, Roy, for example, has played quite well the last couple of games. He's got a couple of points, a couple of goals, a couple of assists. So players like him stepping up, which would normally be seen as, I guess, third line guys, kind of stepping into those top six roles and performing is positive. Yeah. But some of this is just peaks and troughs. Look at the Kings right now. Drew Doughty may not agree with me and you, but I think this is just sometimes what teams go through in a season. You have to snap out of it. Of course you do. But it's, So I've been New Jersey game aside, and I thought the game was a bit of a stinker. Thompson didn't have a good game. He had an 849, I think, save percentage on that game. It's not good for him. But there's a lot to like. The last 10 games, again, we were saying this before we came on air, but they're, I think, 6-3-1 or something along those lines. So give or take around where we want them to be, better than 500. If you can stay that way, then that's great. So it's been good.
It really speaks to their organizational depth as well. I think that, and the consistency of their systems throughout the whole program between the Silver Knights, the Golden Knights, is that these minor league guys, these AHL guys, can come up and plug right into the system, and it translates really well. You occasionally, when you're watching these games, you will see these minor league guys maybe make some uncharacteristic mistakes that you don't see as often from the more senior guys. But you can tell they're well educated on the system and they plug right into it. They know the style. I mean, that consistency is very evident. It's interesting too, when you talk about depth. I love that the Golden Knights, they love centers. They love to bring centers on, and you'll find guys like Stevenson who spend a lot of time playing on the wing on this team because he plays a lot of center as well, but Stevenson will get moved to the wing, Wah will get moved to the wing, but then those guys can slot right back in at center, and that helps a lot as well, I think, when it comes to depth, because as at least from my understanding in hockey, centers can move to wing, but it doesn't work as well going the other way. So if a guy's a career winger, for instance, like Stone, if a guy is a career winger, you're moving him to center isn't going to work nearly as well, but centers can move to wing much more easily. So I love that this team is very center heavy. Even guys that don't play center as often, right? But they can be moved to center.
Totally
so they're great utility players, and you're seeing some of that going on right now because Wah gets moved all over. He plays on the wing, he plays in the middle. Obviously, he's playing center a lot right now. But so speaking of depth and minor league guys, let's talk a little bit about Brendan Brisson. Finally had his NHL debut, his official NHL debut, and scored his first NHL goal, I believe, during his second game, if I'm not mistaken. It was the game winner. And big moment in his development as a player, and it's a good chance to just see a little bit of what he can do on the big stage. And we talked about this. He did get healthy scratched. I believe it was for the New Jersey game or against the Islanders?
So I think it was the Islanders.
Islanders. Yeah. So. And listen, that's going to happen because there have been several guys called up. So there's a couple guys, occasionally that are sitting in the press box who are still called up from the Silver Knights. So, but he had a little bit of a rough game, so maybe that was part of it too, right? And that's a good learning experience. It's like if you don't produce up here, if you don't play well up here, you're in the press box or you're right back down to the minors. So, what did you think of Brisson's, of his debut, and how did you think he held up?
I think he's been pretty solid. He's not blown me away in terms of his overall performance. I'm still, I know, and again, the Vegas fan base might not like this. They probably don't like I'm sat here in a Chicago Blackhawks top either. But but I thought, why not? Stoke the fire a bit. Although we're crap, so yeah, we're certainly not competing with you. That's for certain. All we're doing at the moment is helping the Oilers on their win streak. But
exactly.
But with Brisson, the elite talent. Oh look, Connor Bedard, McDavid's, Matthews. Okay, put all those guys to one side right now. They're the freaks. Okay, they're the guys that come in at like 18 and they're already NHL ready. Very rare for players to be like that. Majority of talent builds in their 20s. By the time they're kind of 23, 24s, where they hit their kind of peak, or at least getting to the peak. Some develop later, tends to be goalies and defensemen, but forwards tend to be slightly earlier. The thing with Brisson is I struggle to see, is he a top 6 guy? And I'm not sure that he will become a top 6 forward in the NHL. I don't want to write him off, though, because I said he is very young. What I think his last 4 games in the NHL have certainly done is they've increased his trade value, because there'll be teams out there that will be looking at a player like him and thinking he's not going to cost us the earth. He's not going to cost 4 first-round picks or some real roster stapleton to have to be traded the other way. But he has got the ability to kind of bridge that gap, right? He scored his first goal. When you look at his AHL stats, and I know people listening and watching this show cast, whatever we want to call it these days, is he's not the kind of scoring forward. He's a bigger body, et cetera, but his AHL numbers haven't really moved on. So if you look at his point per game this year in the AHL, it's the exact same as last year. So I'm not sure that maybe he's going to be what the Golden Knights need. But what he could certainly be, and we saw this with Peyton Krebs, okay, is that he could certainly be something that when it comes to the trade deadline, maybe he's something that Vegas decide, okay, we can use this piece to get something back that we need now, because we're in win now mode. So whether Brisson becomes the top NHL center / winger in 5 years' time, like, with the greatest respect to him as a player, for the Vegas Golden Knights, they don't care about that. Not right now. They're zoned in, laser focused, right, on winning another cup. So, but it was nice to see him make that jump. But there's a few players, like you were saying beforehand, there's a few HL players that have impressed me at different ages as well. I mean, even Rempel, I presume is how that's pronounced. Sheldon Rempel.
Sheldon Rempel. Yeah,
this is a late 20s. Winger who certainly isn't seen as a prospect at his age, but he's done a serviceable job. Dorofeyev, I've been impressed by his development this season. I think he's, he last season he was kind of bouncing up and down AHL and NHL, where he's now part of the NHL squad, in my opinion. Cotter obviously another one. Yeah. So I've been like we were saying, I've been really impressed by, even with these injuries. And there'll be other people that from other fan bases that maybe watch this show that'll say, yeah, everyone has injuries. They do. But we're talking about Eichel, Carlson, and Theodore. Like, these are like 3 of the top 6 guys on the team.
Major pieces. Yeah.
I mean, like, they'll be like saying, okay, so take McDavid and Draisaitl out of Edmonton and see if they do a 15-game win streak. Like, they're probably not. So
and Theodore's a top pairing defenseman. Theodore's definitely top pair.
Yes, number 2. Well, I could be number 1, to be honest. I mean, Pietrangelo is probably seen as number 1 because of his age and his role within the team. But Theodore arguably is the better. And then you've got Eichel, who I think it was Rita who rightly pointed out pre-season that he was going to play more of a two-way forward role on the PK and stuff like that. So you use the special teams impact when you lose these guys. It's not just the fact these are top-line guys. It's the fact of that your power play, your penalty kill get weakened when you take out such pivotal pieces. So I think the Vegas fan base have got a lot to like about the last 5 or 6 games. We're in the business end now, so it doesn't stop. And that's why Cassidy's reaction to the New Jersey game, would he have had that reaction in, say, November, December? Not so sure. I think now it's different. Now we're getting to that business end. You can't afford to be dropping points when you games you should or were winning. So I think that's where the intensity is ramping up as well.
Yeah, that's a good point. Actually, I didn't think about that. It's coaches perhaps, or at least Cassidy might give his team a little more leeway early in the season. But right now we're several months in, and you're right, we're moving towards All-Star break and then trade deadline after that. And like you said, it's business time, and they know what they're supposed to be doing. So he's less patient and more willing to call them out when they don't do what they're supposed to be doing. And yeah, that game they should have won it, and it was very loosey-goosey both ways. It was lazy hockey, and that's pretty much what Cassidy said. It's just very lazy hockey. They didn't stick to their systems. They didn't stick to their structure, and ultimately they paid for it. I mean, it's great that they still got a point out of the game, but Cassidy is he's a big proponent. I love this about him. He focuses less on whether or not they win or lose. He is pleased when they play the way they're supposed to be playing. And then just trusts that the results will follow. And it's like sometimes you play the way you're supposed to play, and the bounces don't go your way, and you still lose. And after games like that, Cassidy's like, you know what? We played a good game. The guys did what they should have done, and we just didn't get the bounces, and that's just how it goes. But we're on the right track. And then they can win a game but play horribly, and he'll call them out. And the cool thing is the team will call themselves out too, right? So it's a healthy culture, in my opinion. I worry sometimes that there are locker room issues, but I don't think we can say that yet this season. I wondered during the skid if there might have been some locker room issues, but that may not have been locker room issues. That may have just been, it's really frustrating to lose that much. And so you're going to see it on the team's face when things aren't going their way. It doesn't necessarily mean that there's drama or problems in the locker room, but
no. And I think Cassidy, there's some moves that the Vegas, now you can tell that it's morning for me. I shouldn't be half asleep. So the Vegas management, so not the NHL, the Vegas management, have made some moves in the last couple of years that have been fantastic. Even if some of them weren't liked at the time, they've ended up paying off over a period of time.
Yeah.
Cassidy, though, bring Cassidy in. Because I know at the time, there was some voices saying maybe this is a little harsh, that it wasn't an awful, that was it all the coach's fault, all those kinds of things. But I think Cassidy was exactly what Vegas needed, and I think he's a real beautiful mix of old and new style of coach. Yeah. He's got there's a hairdryer in there, right? I'm sure if he needs to tell a player that they're not performing, he doesn't beat around the bush. Yeah. But he's not so old school that it's like the hairdryer's constantly on 24/7. Right. And it's like just berate the players into playing the way you want to play. I think he's got enough emotional intelligence that he knows when to throw the water bottle around the dressing room and when to just to support and to guide and to say, look, you did all the right things. We just didn't win the game or whatever it might be. So, I think he's one of the Vegas's secret weapons, not just now, but in the playoffs as well. Because I think that kind of level-headedness, that elite level of coaching, that's when that really, really pays off. But there's a lot to like, and I think there's a lot of teams going into the trade deadline, and I'm going to come to that in a second, but there's a lot of teams going into the trade deadline who are not sure what they want to do. Big teams as well. We're talking about teams like the Maple Leafs and others who are sat there in not limbo, but are sat in that period like, do we trade everything for this season? Right. Or do we maybe play a little bit more cautious this year? Whereas I still think going into the trade deadline, Vegas just stood there going, no, we're all in. Like literal proper Vegas style, just whoosh, we're all in.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And
they're highly likely to be buyers. Yeah, it's.
Oh yeah. I mean, my prediction's sat here right now, and we didn't talk about this beforehand, so you're going to hear this firsthand, JP. But we were worrying about whether they're going to slip to third or second. I don't think it matters. I think first round is going to be which is a rematch, is going to be Vegas.
It's probably going to be against Edmonton. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's just going to be an issue of who gets home ice advantage. And that's a good segue into we had one listener question this week from our good friend Barrett, who is always a loyal listener and always has great questions. And I had the honor of meeting Barrett at a Golden Knights game one time last season. Cool cat. And his question is, it relates to this. It's a two-part question. He says, when Hill returns, should the Knights give him the majority of the starts, or should they do a rotation with him and LT? And then the second part of the question is, with all of the injuries, do you see the Knights making use of the LTIR cap space and trading for some of the top players on the market? So let's flip those around, since we were already talking about trade deadline and we were kind of talking about that. Let's stay on that topic, and then we'll talk about Hill and Thompson after that. So I'm going to throw it to you, Ian. We talked about this a little bit before we rolled on this, with Theodore on LTIR, with Carlson on LTIR. Depending on where we're at by the trade line, you told me there's a fair amount of cap space available, which means the Golden Knights could make a big splash. They got enough room to make a big splash this year. And if we know anything about Vegas, if they have room, they're going to do it, right? So talk to me. We talked some numbers. What are we looking at here for cap space?
So according to Cap Friendly, let's get that caveat in straight away. According to Cap Friendly, the LTIR projected is 8 million. And what it's saying in terms of cap space is that as they're at the deadline, they'll have about 7 million to play with. Now,
that's huge.
It's huge, because what you've also got to remember is, because you're thinking, okay, so we can get a £7 million player. No, actually, you can get somebody more than that, because the reality is you're only paying their contract for a certain period of time. So you're only playing their contract from when you pick them up, and the deadline this year is at the beginning of March.
It's prorated. Yeah.
It's prorated. Yeah.
Yeah.
So you see, and the Vegas have used this in years gone by, where they've maybe had $1 million or $2 million to play with. They've gone and got a £4 million or £5 million guy because they can afford it with the prorated amount. So Vegas are 100% buyers. Like they are. I don't doubt that for a second.
Yeah.
They've got cap space to use, and I can guarantee you they're going to use it. So the question then comes, okay, so who are we going to go for? And I think in terms of who we're going to go for, that's probably a long conversation for me and you to have. So we're going to pick that up on a different cast, because the reality is, even though it feels like it's close, and it is, you're talking weeks away now, not months, but a lot can change in 6 weeks. So who's on the block, who's not on the block? I mean, I saw things talking about Line, Patrick Kane. I've seen lots of different people's opinions, but the reality
depends on where they're sitting in the standings.
That's
too.
it. I mean, like if LA totally fall out, like could they be sellers? Yeah, maybe. Okay, and who's going to sell what? Like, everything. A Minnesota or another team that I look at and I go, okay, it's not working for them. Are they sellers? If they're sellers, who are they selling? Are they selling everybody? Are they selling, Eriksson Ek, I've seen is mentioned around. Like, could be anybody. But for me, what's more important from Vegas' side right now is, okay, so you've got the cap space. That's part of the equation. So the other part of the equation is, what are you going to give up? Because you're not going to get it for nothing. This isn't football or soccer, and you can't just buy a player, right? So it's a trade, right? And as everybody who's no doubt watching this, listening to this podcast knows, that means you've got to give something up that's of equal value of whatever you're getting back. So say they go big, and they go with a big name, who's expensive, who's maybe on a UFA, expiring deal. So there's no long-term cap implications, because we've got LTIR right now, but we've got nothing next year. So like we can't be. It needs to be a player that's contract ends at the end of this year. You're going to have to give something up. And as of right now, in picks, we've got a first, a second, a third, a fifth, a sixth, and 2 sevenths. So as I was saying to you earlier, third, fifth, sixth, and sevenths, they're additional pieces. Like, you're not going to get much for that. So you're talking about second and first rounders. So could Vegas trade a first rounder? They could. Historically, they haven't. Historically, they've traded other things, either prospects or later round picks. They don't make a massive habit of trading first round picks, although obviously things like Eichel and stuff were different. But for me, I think they could trade their first round pick. It's quite a heavily stacked first round this year. in terms of prospects. Again, we can cover this on another cast, but they're unlike last year where you had like Bedard and then a bit of a drop off, one or two other players in that kind of top three, but then not being harsh, but quite a big drop off then in terms of potential level for the rest of the first round. This year, it's probably more even. There's a couple of players that I think are stand out. Celebrini is one that people are obviously looking at, but there's others. So I could see potentially doing a first round pick, but maybe not. But then we come back to people like Brendan Brisson. Like Brendan Brisson could be the way that you get a player that is elite level on an expiring deal without having to trade tons of picks to get him, and so. And this was my point earlier about Brisson. I don't think he's done any harm in showing the league, you know what, I can play at this level. I might not be Austin Matthews, but I can play at this level because I think that increases his trade value. And I know when people like Krebs got traded that not everybody likes that, but it comes down to objective right now. And the objective right now is win. So I could see him being on the trade block for the Vegas Golden Knights because they're going to have to give up something because the one thing that we talked about earlier in the season as well, which has not changed, they're missing Riley Smith. Like they're missing the goals. And when you have some injuries, Riley Smith was a great player to be able to push up the lineup. And he was totally fine. First line, second line, third line, fine. So finding a player that can play first or second line minutes that isn't a first or second line player is hard. But getting a first or second line player on in like an expiring deal, that I think is what Vegas will do.
Yeah. It's easier to do that, and it would mirror some deals that they've done in the past, right? Where they've maybe traded off one of their NHL level guys along with a prospect, like one of the more notable prospects. They'll do that and make a big splash to bring in a big name player, like you said. They've certainly executed those kind of trades in the past, and it like with. Let's see, I think the Cody Glass trade was kind of structured like that. And trying to think the defenseman that they traded away, didn't they trade him to Ottawa? I think I've forgotten now. But I remember a couple of trades that were structured in a very similar fashion. And like you said, they've got the room to do it this year. So, yeah, it'll be interesting to see what happens. I'd be shocked if Vegas didn't make some sort of big move like that because it's Vegas. And they're in win now mode. They're cup champions. They're going to want to repeat. So it'll be exciting to see. I think you're right. It's a little early to start predicting who, because a lot can change in the next, 6 weeks, I think we have until the deadline. Yeah, but
totally
that will start to develop. Over the next few weeks, that picture is going to start to develop a little more for sure.
100%. I mean, I'm going back through so what I've done on Cap Friendly is just filter trades that involved first round picks. And the last one was Jack Eichel. I thought it was a conditional first round pick, admittedly, but that was in there, and that was all to do with what Vegas got back. But at the time, we traded. Vegas traded their 2022 first round pick, which ended up being a 16th overall. But the only trade before that involved a first round pick was back in 2018. When this is a blast from the past, when the Vegas Golden Knights acquired forward Thomas Tatar. And to get Thomas Tatar, by the way, and this was a trade deadline move, right? They traded a second, a first, and a third. Yeah. Okay. In 2018 for Thomas Tatar. Now that kind of move I could see happening again. I just don't see the Vegas management trading the first, second, and third. They're not. They want to win now, but I think they're aware that like they're looking back at the shelf and going, oh, okay, we've traded quite a lot of this now. We probably can't keep, trading every single asset that we draft. So whereas Brisson, I think he has that like. Some of the other names we talked about before we press record, some of the defensemen like Lucas Cormier and stuff like that, they're potential trade options, but they don't have anywhere near the same sort of value that Brisson would command. Right. Brisson's a center; they're always worth a bit more. He has got, there's still a lot of people in the, in terms of scouts and stuff in the NHL that see him as being this top six forward. So that's my hot take. Is I think Brisson could move.
Yeah.
On the deadline.
It wouldn't surprise me at all. No, I think that's very astute. And Barrett, thank you for that. That's a great question. Barrett always comes at us with really
we didn't answer the other half.
Yeah, no, we'll hit that next. Yeah, let's move on to Hill and
you got it planned. Sorry, JP.
It's all good, all good. But yeah, Barrett, we're gonna hit let's change gears now. We'll hit the goalie question. And actually, we talked about this just before we rolled. Ian, Hill had an astonishing. So when Barrett submitted this question, they had not played the game against the Islanders yet. So Hill had an astonishing return against the Islanders. I don't have his exact save percentage in front of me, but it was above 940.
I think it was.
Was it? Yeah. Okay, yeah. It was.
I double checked, but it was high. I know that for a fact.
Incredibly high. He was a brick wall back there. And that made all the difference because they only won the game by 1 goal. And Islanders made a push. It was tight, but they won in regulation. And the team played reasonably well, but Hill was a huge part of that. So that's promising. And I think I honestly think Thompson has maybe struggled a little under the load, perhaps under the basically playing every game with, I think Patera picked up a game or two in there, but I mean, here's my opinion, and then I want to hear what you think, Ian. I think initially, as we know, Hill and Thompson were splitting it 50-50. And I think that is a healthy pace for both of those guys. I do think as playoffs near, assuming they both stay healthy, one guy is going to move into that. They're not going to go 50-50 in the playoffs, obviously. And I think the closer you get to the playoffs, the more one guy is going to be, kind of move more into the starting position. I still do think that in the regular season, they're more likely to be like a 2-game, 1-game, 2-game, 1-game, as opposed to an A and a B. Like less of a starter backup situation and more of like one guy shoulders about 66% of the load and the other guy about 33%. I think that we're more likely to see something like that in the regular season, but it will be with the intention of whoever the number one guy is being the guy they ride in the playoffs. And my prediction, I think it's probably going to be Hill. I think they're both outstanding goalies. I think Hill has had an edge over Thompson consistently for the last year or so. But who knows? And anything can happen. But what do you think, Ian? What are your thoughts on the goalie situation?
So, and I shouldn't have doubted you, JP, in terms of having the agenda sorted. This is why you organise things and I don't.
No, it's all good, man. I was thinking, and you thought I was wrapping it up.
So I didn't want to do Barrett a disservice. So, in terms of the two parts of that question, first part, I disagree. I think they'll still roll 50-50.
Half and half the whole way.
Let me caveat that. I disagree up until I think a couple of weeks before. So maybe the last 8 or 7 games before they roll into playoffs, they might move to a 2-1. But the big the factor here is going to be, do they need to win those games to get in, or are they in? If they're in, then I think they keep it 50-50. They need to win
health.
For health, because you just don't want to lose. And look, where I totally agree with you, the starter first game of the playoffs, injuries aside, is Adin Hill. And I like Logan Thompson. I think Hill is the better goalie. And if you disagree, that's great. Let's talk about that on Twitter. We love that sort of stuff. But I think, or X, sorry.
I know, I'm still not used to it.
No, well, especially compared to still called tweets. But anyway, or X's. But Hill is the starter, right? All day long, Hill is the starter. And Thompson would be a starter in like most, probably 28 of 32 teams. Okay, he'd still be the starter. But Adin Hill has proven this. There were doubters after the Stanley Cup, and there's always been doubters in Hill's career. But even after his performance last season, I think some people are like, but can he replicate it this season? And he has. His numbers are astounding. A couple of injuries aside, I think he would seriously be in the Vezina conversation. It annoys me sometimes when he's not. I think And Vegas has this with a few players, and whether it's just this kind of Vegas factor, I don't know. But like, he's not seen as like top 3, top 4 goalies in the NHL. And I have no idea why, because when you look at his statistics, his save percentage, it's immense. Sorokin obviously is up there. Demko obviously is up there this year. But like, Demko is seen as this elite level, potential future Hall of Famer goalie, and then who had a bad season last season. Just check out the stats. He had a bad season last season. And then you look at Adin Hill, and like, nobody puts him in that conversation. I just don't understand it. So he will start the first game in the playoffs if he's healthy. Obviously, anything can happen after that. We know that because that's how Hill got in last season. Because it was Brossoit that started the playoffs.
Right.
But Hill is Vegas' starter. They know that. And when we're talking a year from now about trades and blocks or in the off season, don't be surprised if Thompson's name starts popping up, because I think if Hill performs well again this year, remember, he'll be in his final year of this 2-year deal that he's on. I think Vegas will see him as being the starter. And I think they know that now. They just roll the two of them because, A, it's a massive benefit to have 2 great goalies, so why wouldn't you roll both? But it manages the workloads, like you rightly said a minute ago. And I think Hill or Thompson would struggle doing that. I think most goalies these days, there's very few teams that have like a starter and backup. Most have 1A, 1B. And especially if you look at the West, only really teams like, I suppose, Dallas, technically, with Ottinger and I think it's Westwood, isn't it, who's the backup. So, but most have a 1A, 1B scenario. So that's my to answer Barrett's question. I think as long as they don't need to win, so if they go on a skid and they fall out of the top 3 and they're in the wild card bit, then expect 2 and 1. If they're still second or third and they're going to get in the playoffs, or they've already qualified, then I think it'll be 50-50. But don't be surprised if the last couple of games are Hill, and then we get in the playoffs.
No, I think you're probably right, and I didn't consider that it may be dependent upon what their record is looking like and where they are in the standings go in. Because you're right, why would you wear him out? As long as he's playing enough as long as Hill is playing enough to keep him sharp, why would you wear him out unless you're chasing and trying to stay in the race? Thanks for that question again, Barrett. By the way, that's fantastic stuff. You always come at us with really interesting and well thought out questions. So, and thanks for listening as always. We appreciate you, buddy. And that kind of segues into our last topic here. We talked about getting into the playoffs and the chase, and we touched on this a little bit earlier. But look, just on a sports level, I'm sure they're all nice people. On a sports level, we hate the Oilers. I hate the Oilers, especially after that really heated series in the second round of last year's playoffs. Oilers have won 15 straight. This is nuts, guys. 15 straight games is insanity. And we were talking a little bit about this before we started, Ian, but you looked up kind of the current record for winning streak. Oilers they're creeping up on that if they win another couple of games. Do you have those stats in front of you?
I do have those stats to hand. And the joy of me not walking into the office or being in the car or various other random places that you guys
you
find
can
me
call
in.
up stats on your screen.
I can actually I can stare at 2 screens. It's amazing. So the Edmonton Oilers are currently 15-game win streak as of today. They obviously beat the Chicago Blackhawks last night or this morning, depending on where you are in the world. So they're at 15. Now, the only streaks that are higher, there's 4 streaks that there are 2 streaks that are higher than 15. There were 2 streaks that were at 15. But as we were saying before we pressed go on this episode, I think the one thing you have to take into account is that we're in a salary cap era. So that matters when you're looking at historical NHL stats, because we know there's parity. We know that the league is closer and there's more teams that can win, which means that going on a win streak is even harder in a salary capped league than it is when it isn't. So if I look at the 4 streaks that were either equal or better than the Edmonton Oilers' current streak. You have the Pittsburgh Penguins in 2012, 2013. They hit 15. It's sad. I remember that. The New York Islanders in 1981-82 hit 15. I don't remember that, by the way, because I'm not old enough to have been alive. So make sure they get that across now. Don't be fooled by the tiredness. In 2016-2017, Columbus Blue Jackets hit 16. I remember that as well. I also remember them winning nothing in the season. Streaks are great, but they don't win you cups. And Pittsburgh Penguins in 92-93, back when Penguins were immense, 17 win streak. So the reason I'm telling you all this is you could look at the Oilers streak and say, okay, so if they win another 2, it's the longest streak, 3, sorry, it's the longest streak of all time. That would be right. But if they get to 16, in my opinion, they've already equaled the longest streak in a salary cap era, because it would be the Columbus Blue Jackets at 16. So if they get to 17 and they lose, I would still say it's the best win streak of all time in terms of length, because it's just that much more difficult to do it in a salary. Right. You don't get the nights off. You don't play the teams. Like, the disparity in the league in the 90s and the 80s was much larger than now, which is one of the reasons why the salary cap is such a great introduction. That's why the sports took it up, whether it was the NFL, NBA, doesn't matter. So it's seriously impressive. I mean, let's be honest, like, beginning of the season, they were dreadful. Like,
they had a rough
comically
start.
Dreadful. We were talking about, does McDavid get traded? Like, all these sorts of conversations.
Are they going to miss the playoffs?
That's it. Like, at what point is McDavid going to turn around to management and say, guys, I've had enough of this now? Like, all these sorts of things were going on. 15 games later, and now people are talking, could these guys win the cup? Like, are they going to go and beat them for the rest of the season? Let me answer that now. No. But
they won't. They can't maintain it.
No, but I think
it's not possible. But
they are now back in the playoffs, which is impressive given from where they were. 50-game win streak is seriously impressive anyway. They have lots of things not going for them. Like, the team is still heavily weighted into their superstars. The goalie situation is slightly chaotic. So, I go back to what I said earlier in the show. First round, it's going to be Vegas versus Edmonton. That's my call.
I think you're probably right. We kind of asked the question at the beginning of the episode, can Vegas hold on? Are they going to slip out? If you look at the Pacific Division standings, the Kings obviously are slipping. They're having a rough time. They're now in the wild card position, last I checked. I'm going to confirm that right now. They're in the first wild card spot. So in terms of the Pacific, when we hit the All-Star break here, after that, the Golden Knights have a very light schedule for a few weeks. Over the I think it's during a 20-day stretch, they're only going to play 3 games. So what's going to happen? That's going to be good for the team in terms of rest and getting guys back, I think. But what that means is the Oilers, who have 4 games in hand on the Golden Knights and are currently in third, and the Kings, who have 3 games in hand on the Golden Knights and currently sit in the wild card spot. But they're at 53 points. The Oilers are at 57 points. The Golden Knights are at 62 points. So I think the picture we're starting to see here is, if the Kings don't clean it up real soon, they are going to fight for a wild card position to get into the playoffs. It's that simple. And so, like you said, probably what's going to happen, barring anything cataclysmic, is that the Oilers and the Golden Knights are going to battle it out for second and third, which means it doesn't matter. Like you said, the first round that would equal Vegas Edmonton either way. It's just a question of who gets home ice advantage, right? Because second and third place always play each other in the first round. I'm not positive anybody's catching Vancouver at this point unless they hit a real skid, which they could. But Vancouver doesn't appear to be slowing down at any time soon. They've played 48 games, and so have the Golden Knights. They have 69 points. The Golden Knights have 62. You can make up that gap, but that's kind of how things are starting to look, right? And now, given if the Kings heat up again, they could crawl back into that mix. But they're starting to fall behind. But anyway, it'll be interesting. I think during that time when the Golden Knights only play 3 games over 20 days, the Oilers will probably make up most of those games in hand. And have a feeling they might pass the Golden Knights up or come very close, get to the point where they're neck and neck, and now they're leapfrogging each other kind of for the rest of the season. That's kind of what I anticipate. Because the Kings are slipping, I'm less concerned about the Golden Knights falling out, especially with their recent return to form. But do you think there's any danger of them slipping out, or do you think that's probably just not going to happen?
No, I don't. And I think Edmonton will pass Vegas. Like you said, they've got 5 points to make up, but they've got 4 games to do it in. A total of 8 points available in those 4 games. Could they get 5 from those 8? Yeah, if they carry on the current streak, they could get 8 from 8. But I think more than likely they'll lose a couple of games or get a couple of overtime losses. So,
but either way, that gets them within a point of Vegas, and now they're
and that's it. So I could see Vegas and Edmonton switching around. The interesting bit's the wild card, because in the Central, a division that obviously we don't look at too often, but there's a massive drop off. So you've got Winnipeg at 65, Colorado at 65, Dallas at 64. And then Nashville, who's the next highest team, on 53, so 10 points back. But
huge drop
because of where the Kings are. The Kings' biggest risk now is that if they fall off, they end up in a battle with not Edmonton and Vegas, but Nashville, the Blues, the Coyotes, the Kraken.
Yeah, they're going to be battling it out with several other teams that are right in that range. Yeah.
So you've probably got wild card now. You've got 5 teams that are in that wild card race. And I think it's LA, Preds, Blues, Coyotes, and Kraken. And arguably at the moment, it's probably in that order in terms of who's more likely to get in. It could make LA dangerous, but and LA don't have as many games in hand as Edmonton. They have one less on the Vegas Golden Knights, and also those games in hand, because we know because we were talking about it before, they actually come obviously after the All-Star game. After the All-Star break, am I right in thinking that Vegas have like 3 games in like a couple of weeks, and that's when obviously those games in hands will start to be used up, and they'll gap will close. So. Vegas will get in. I said that from the beginning of the season. They're a playoff team. They will make the playoffs. They will bolster. The really interesting thing for me is who's going to go. I'm just going to use the phrase then, but it'll push our podcast into a different style in terms of not being kid friendly. But who's going to go all in? Right? Are Vancouver going to go all in? Like, are they going to see this as being like a rare year for them to be able to go? All in, or is it going to be same with the Oilers? Like the Oilers look at this season as being, you know what, we didn't think we were going to get in, so we're gonna really like trade away and try and bolster. Its cap obviously is the constricting factor, but it's going to be interesting, mate.
It's worth mentioning. I know we're about to wrap here, but it's worth mentioning that the Oilers just picked up Corey Perry as well. So that's a very interesting move. That I mean, obviously, like he's a veteran player and he's kind of a year-to-year guy at this point, but they're still trying to add. They're kicking tail and they're like, let's still beef up this line. I mean, they got to be thinking Cup. They're thinking Cup.
I'm really shocked.
They consider themselves contenders, right?
I'm shocked with that. If I'm honest, I'm shocked with that. Given how he left Chicago, exactly. I'm a little shocked. I didn't think it was the end. I'm a little shocked it's within the same season. And also a team that is flying. And we were talking about dressing room stuff, and I'm not being horrible to Corey Perry, but it's not like he left the Chicago Blackhawks without there being controversy.
Yeah, there's some controversy surrounding the player.
I'm kind of surprised with that, if I'm honest.
Yeah, you could certainly critique the decision, but I think it indicates, at least in my mind, what the Oilers are thinking. Like, I think the management is thinking, they're thinking Cup. They're definitely thinking we're contenders. We're going for the Cup, and we're going to bolster this lineup and whatever. Now, you could certainly question whether it's a good decision or not. I feel like the Oilers have a history of some questionable decisions for sure. But anyway, it'll be really interesting to see. And in another 2-3 weeks, we're really going to start that playoff picture is going to start to firm up a bit, particularly in the Pacific, like you said, because of those some of those gaps, and it's going to start to become clearer. Could someone catch Vancouver? Possibly, but Vancouver would definitely have to fall off. They would have to hit their skid, and they haven't really had one yet. If they have one, there's a chance Vegas or Edmonton could catch them, right? But at their current pace, if they're consistent, I don't think anybody's going to catch them.
They're not going to fall off. The bigger question mark comes on what teams are in and around the wild card mix. Minnesota,
that's going to be the race.
We talked about Kraken as another one. Which one of those teams falls off and goes from like potential buyer at deadline to out and out seller? Yeah, because you've got other names in there as well: Pittsburgh, Washington, Islanders, Kraken, obviously, Flames, Minnesota. These are all teams that have got things that Vegas arguably would want.
Yeah,
they're in and around that mix.
Right,
a good 6 weeks, and you're in the playoff hunt, and you don't sell. A bad 6 weeks, and the for sale signs are everywhere, and it's everything must go. So, who knows?
Exactly. This is always a fun time of year because the drama starts to unfold and things change very quickly. And like look at the conversation we're having. It's so different than the kind of conversations we have in the fall. It's all right. It's very different. Like now we're starting, you can see the picture coming together. So this is always a fun time of year. The Golden Knights, as we said, have been impressive that they're managing to string together wins under the current circumstances. It speaks highly of their depth, and I think they're going to. I expect them to go on another deep run this year. So it's always fun to be a part of it.
Sorry, man, but it sends a really good message to the locker room as well, especially when you got young guys like Vegas have got this year in terms of the AHL guys. If you go and bring in a really big name, a real kind of top six forward, someone that everybody's like, oh man, these guys, like Vegas brought in him. Like, imagine the locker room boost when that player, even before that player gets there, and they get in that first day and they can see that player's jersey like hanging up on one of the coat hangers, and they can see it and think, Jesus, like we're in for this. I think it sends a really big message to the organization that even if they're in third at this point, like we don't care, we're in it to win it. So they'll go big.
Absolutely. Yeah. No, it's good stuff. It's been just since our last episode, the Knights have really turned it around, and that's what's so exciting about the sport, right? Is if you're not happy with how things are going, wait a couple of weeks because it very well may change. It doesn't always, but things change on a dime in this league. Like you said, the parity, it's really competitive. So, well, thanks again to all of our listeners. And Barrett, thank you again for your question. We appreciate all of you and your support and interacting with all of you on X/Twitter. And we'll be back with you here in a couple of weeks unless some big news comes down the pipe, in which case we'll release a special episode. So thanks again, everybody. Ian, thanks, buddy. It's been great. For our listeners, we'll see you in a couple of weeks. Take care, everybody. Be safe, be well, and we'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.